with migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. So for us, for our team, has been very, very special, all the effort and the collaboration that all these entities has developed with us, because without that, it would be completely impossible to accede to this kind of information. The focus group works was very interesting because highlighted difficulties and aspects that some entities didn't know from the others. These elements lead us to prepare the guide for the good practices through the 3 meetings with the almost 20 public and private entities. This material, finished in a manual impressed by our Andalusia government with 500 copies that has been given to different social services, health, security forces, ONGs, and juridical services and offices. In Spain, we have been developing also seldom awareness activities, not only for the target migrant group, but also for the Spanish population. On the first hand, we have elaborated a guide for next steps in Spain in 4 languages, Spanish, English, French, and Arab, in order to help women migrants to know what they should and can do in their first time in our country. On the second hand, we have prepared 2 papers in a divulgative journal, no, 3 papers, and 2 participations in the European Researchers' Night. The formation activities have been developed with a great success, with many people involved, not only in the face-to-face course, but also in the online course and in the training for trainers, reaching even more than 100 emergency responses. And all that with our package about diffusion and dissemination of all the projects and all the activities of the project from Greece and Italy, to disseminate all the information for general public, but also entities and people who work with this collective as a volunteer. So I think this is all. And I give the floor now to my colleague Ismini from Generation 2.0 in Greece.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for your participation in this conference. We won't take your time to present the activities. Marianela at the beginning mentioned the general activities of the project, but we choose to mention a few activities in Greece. One of these is the focus groups that we organized at the beginning of the project. 3 groups with civil society organizations, with institutions, and with migrant and refugee communities in Greece. And why we choose to mention this activity is because we realized it was the base on which we then design the activities, such as the trainings, the protocol agreement of the actors that are involved in dealing with the sexual and gender-based violence. And actually, through these 3 meetings with these actors, we were able to better understand the needs of each group, and then to combine the elements we get from those discussions. So we try to include their needs in the future actions. And actually, it was it's worth to mention because at that time we could realize this kind of activities in person. It was before the COVID period. And another activity which Natasha will present after me from CMOP, it was a preparation of the protocol agreement where we invited again actors from three sectors: legal aid, social support, and health sector. But then we, for that case, we combined, let's say, the groups. We invited institutions and civil society organizations active on its sector in order to exchange good practices and needs, which was also arrive in an agreement that everybody could accept and sign. And the third activity that I would like to mention is a more recent activity, the creation of five awareness-raising videos on sexual and gender-based violence. Actually, there are short videos in English, French, Greek, Arabic, and Farsi. Those videos are addressed to refugee and migrant women, but in general to the refugee and migrant communities in Greece, where someone can find the basic of information on what kind of support can have in case of sexual and gender-based violence. I think in next week with CMOP, we will upload those videos in our website so it can be accessible to everybody. At that moment, we have organized focus groups in order to promote this video in the frame of concrete participants and beneficiaries. That's all from me. Natasha, you can take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismini. Thank you all. Good morning to everyone. I would like firstly to begin by saying thank you to Oxfam Italia, to Marianella, to all the consortium for this great collaboration. A truly remarkable project. And I think that we achieved very important results and impact. Our main objective is to strengthen the response to SGBV against migrants and refugees, especially women who are mainly affected, but not only. I guess that this project tries and succeeds in dealing with all major aspects of this objective, meaning strengthening the networking of professionals, of mediators, strengthening the capacity building and the awareness of communities and the population. As Ismini mentioned before, the networking was able to be made through the network meetings, through the mutual protocol agreement, which was a great success and a way of collaborating authorities and organizations, and of course of letting them know that they can work with mediators that are trained on how to better respond to SGBV cases. Knowledge and networking are crucial in this matter. Apart from that, we managed to strengthen the capacity building of cultural mediators through the trainings that we had. We trained 67 cultural mediators and 30 professionals in the training of the trainers. We also managed to create a group of people that follow the project activities, which is, to me, a major success in terms of awareness and knowledge. And we also held a very successful event. Unfortunately, all of the events that I mentioned were online due to the situation, but nonetheless, they were successful. The national event that we held in Greece, we gathered almost 200 people. That is a success in numbers, but not only. We treated a subject that needs to be heard, People that treat cases need to discuss it and share their knowledge. So to sum up, a truly remarkable project and people that worked to achieve them. The video that is mainly mentioned is in 5 languages. It is short, but has all the important information, and we really believe that we can make people that do not understand their rights or their strengths be motivated to report the abuse that they face or someone that they know face. So thank you all, and I believe that we will have a very interesting meeting. Should I also introduce our speakers now or later on before their speeches? What would be better? Marianela.
Hi. So after all presentation about our national context and the results achieved, I think we can leave the floor to our first speaker, our colleague from Differenza Donna, a human rights and anti-violence organization. And so to the lawyer, Ilaria Boiano. Thank you, Ilaria, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to share experiences and practices in this challenging time for all of us, and more for people who are our objective, our the beneficiary of our action. I say hello also to all the members of the consortium. Many of them are already known because part of other projects we are working on together. And so I just would like to present my organization, which is a feminist organization aiming at prevent and combat or overcome all forms of violence against women, including trafficking for sexual exploitation and all kind of mistreatment migrant and refugee women suffered from. In particular, we can say, remember some words of the executive director of UN Women, that the crisis deriving from the COVID-19 pandemic has been the most discriminatory crisis against women that we have ever experienced. And in many cases, the gains made in the past on women's empowerment and gender equality now are at a serious risk. This is particularly true for migrant and asylum seekers and refugees, in particular women who are moving across the globe. We know that gender-based violence is pervasive worldwide. According to UN Women, globally 35% of women report experiencing physical or sexual violence perpetrated by an intimate partner or someone who is not a partner. Restrictions on freedom of movement due to the pandemic, social isolation, financial difficulties have further increased women's vulnerability for all women, in particular for migrant women. And as a result, the number of calls and requests for help to the helplines and women's shelters in Italy and in the other countries of the world has increased fivefold in some countries due to the higher rates of intimate partner violence. In general, in Italy, we can say that there was a serious increase of violence compared to before the pandemic and during its various phases. We, as Differenza Donna, is managing the national helpline 1522 since May 2020. So in the middle of the pandemic measures, we started the managing of these services, and we can testify from the first initial stall in telephone and in-person access to anti-violence centers since the second month of the measures, so April 2020, thanks to the management also of the helpline. The trend of phone calls and contact through messaging confirmed the correspondence of our observation with what happened in the country. And we find confirmation about our experiences of this increasing request of help from women, from both Italian women and migrant women. In particular, we registered intervention of the second generation of migrant women, daughters calling for asking help for their mothers during the pandemic measures. And ISTAT, that is the National Institute for Statistical Research in Italy, examined the data from the last year of the helpline operation and documented that the number of telephone and chat calls in the period between March and June 2020 more than doubled compared to the same period the previous year. So we had from 6,000 contacts to 15,000 contacts. On the other hand, calls made for unintentional mistakes or intentional mistakes, those calls made as a joke or simply to harass, aimed at denigrating the help service, decreased. The growth in chatroom help requests increased fivefold from 400 messages to 2,000 messages. In addition to the request for help from victims of violence, there was also an increasing calls for information, the type of services offered by the helpline and from the organizations working on the issue on the national territory. To go to the core of my intervention and my contribution, I can say that from our observatory, we assisted to a serious diffusion of risk factors, in particular the job loss and from one hand, on the other hand, also even working from home through the new system of smart working solutions that private sectors gave to women can be identified as risk factors. Many women, in particular those migrant women that have more precarious kind of jobs, lost their job. At the same time, women working from home have been continuously subjected to various forms of psychological violence and even physical violence. Also protective factors that we identified before the pandemic emergency, we could identify in the high level of education or the availability of unemployment became part of the risk factors, as I explained, in particular in case of smart working. In particular, we registered a serious obstacles to the full access to justice for all women, in particular for migrant and refugee women. And I can give you as example a case which is one of the many we followed during the pandemic period that can give you the measure of the obstacles women found, migrant and refugee women found during 2020. But we can call the woman with the name Adriana. Adriana is coming from Peru. She was living in Italy without a permit of stay because she never received any kind of information about the possibility even to ask for protection in the framework of the asylum system. And in the meantime, she was living with an abusive partner who, during the pandemic measures, increased the level of the intimate partner, and she escaped from a serious aggression, violence, physical violence and sexual violence. So she was referred by the police officers to our shelter, just to receive information about legal support and all the procedure to look for a protection. The day after, the police officers invited her to the office with the excuse to give her other information and collect some papers like the medical report she had from the hospital where she was accompanied the day before. Once she was there, she received the expulsion order, and she called us, she called the shelter, frightened, and then she was accompanied by the officer to the immigration office, so from the to the questura, in order to receive the expulsion order. So we decided not only to follow the official path, that was to immediately contest the expulsion order before the judicial authority, to ask for the protection, for the authorization to the prosecutor to request and obtain the specific permit of stay that we have in our legal system, specifically dedicated to victims of domestic violence, Article 18 of the immigration law, 18 bis of immigration law. But we then reported the event, what happened before calling the attention of the Minister of Interior, and also denouncing the obstacles to the access to justice for this woman, to the journalists, to the media, because it was a serious breach in our vision of the not only of the fundamental rights of this woman, but also a blindness of the authorities, all the authorities working in a serious circumstances, like those deriving from the pandemic situation. And we obtained the immediate revocation of the expulsion. And after 2 days from our request, we obtained also the authorization of the prosecutor for the recognition of the specific permit of stay. For us, this was not a victory, because we can say that this was just the example of the worst practice that we assisted to during the last year, that many women are still facing now in case of request for help. I have to say that on a sample of 50 women, we have the opportunity to meet at our help desk in the Center for the Repatriation in Ponte Galeria, all the 50 women known from 2019 to the beginning of 2020 were victims of this kind of institutional violence. So they saw the repatriation, the expulsion and the repatriation order once they asked for help. So once they deposit a complaint, or when they ask for the intervention in a situation of emergency at their home. So this is the sign of a very very serious institutional violence. Where were our practices to face this kind of increased risk factors for women, in particular migrant and refugee women? We stayed open all the emergency period. All our shelters continue now and continued their activities, receiving women in person, because we support the idea of a need of awareness about self-care as responsibility in time of a pandemic, but also responsibility to continue to grant the most open and accessible services to women. We advocated for funds, and we obtained, together with other civil society organizations, more funds to support temporary shelters in order to allow the quarantine periods for women waiting to enter in the anti-violence shelters. And in this way, we managed to face the situation of women who were at serious risk of life in case of permanence in the home with their partner. And we continue also to report to the institution and authorities the inefficiencies of authorities, in particular police officers who refused to collect complaints from women, or cases of denial of protection and through criminal precautionary measures. And the most serious situation was that of women exploited for sexual purposes and victims of trafficking, because many of them were in a serious situation of further exploitation. In particular, there was involvement in criminal activities in order to, as a survival exploitation for them. We had many problems to maintain the rate of immersion and recognition of victims of trafficking, because many services where we established a point of access, a point and help desk, were closed, like the Commission for the Territory Commissions for International Protection, or the same Center for Repatriation, where we didn't have access for since March 2020. So this was just a little picture, not exhaustive, I know. I hope to continue participating to the conference, to have the possibility to answer and integrated my contribution.
Thank you very much, Ilaria, for your in-depth presentation. And I think that later on we can come back to your presentation for some questions and to deepen the discussion, also with some inputs from the participants. And now we leave the floor to the colleague Ton Mancilla Yakas. I'm sorry for my Spanish pronunciation. Welcome, and please, I leave you the speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's a great pleasure to participate in this conference. My name is Antoni Mancilla. I am a lawyer in the organization ACSEM in Barcelona. And in ACSEM, we provide assistance to refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants. And today in this conference, I will be talking about the specific difficulties that Lgbt asylum seekers and migrants have had to go through during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I prepared a very short presentation because I think it will make it easier for everyone to follow the presentation. So I will share my screen, and then you tell me if you can see it all right. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
So okay, so as I was saying, I will be talking about the impact of the pandemic to specifically those refugees and asylum seekers who seek asylum because they have been persecuted in their countries of origin because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And first of all, I would like to briefly mention the main changes that have happened to the Spanish asylum system because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then I will concrete how these changes have affected specifically LGBT refugees and migrants. So, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly affected the Spanish asylum system. First of all, and obviously, there has been an obstruction of the main legal and safe migration routes. This has happened in all countries, obviously, because of the pandemic situation. And this affects all asylum seekers, all migrants. Of course, the international movement has gone through different restrictions in general, and this has affected the main migration routes in order for migrants and asylum seekers to get to Spain. According to the Spanish law, if one person wants to apply for asylum in Spain, they need to be in Spanish territory, so they need to get here. This is why the obstruction of legal and safe migration routes has deeply affected asylum seekers during the pandemic. Also, because of the pandemic, the access to the asylum system has become more difficult. In the first part of the pandemic, many asylum interviews, which is the first interview that the asylum applicant has with the authorities to explain their case, many of those interviews were suspended during the first part of the pandemic. So many people could not apply for asylum during this time and had to wait for a long time until they could finally do the asylum interview and formally apply for asylum. Also, there have been changes in the case resolution system. So in the way that the asylum authorities resolve and make the decisions about the cases. For example, one of the main changes is that before the pandemic, sometimes asylum seekers went through a second asylum interview in the case that their case was a bit more complicated and the decision maker needed to speak with them again before making a decision. And usually this was very positive for asylum seekers, and especially for LGBT asylum seekers, as I will say in a few minutes. And also, there has been an acceleration in the decision-making process in the asylum system. So before the pandemic, asylum applications took a very long time to be resolved, sometimes even 1 year, 2 years, or even more. And now we saw during the first part of the pandemic, the asylum authorities somehow during the lockdown started to make decisions really quickly, really fast. And now we see how the asylum applications are being resolved sometimes in a few months, which is not always positive for asylum seekers and for some specific cases of asylum. So how has all these changes, all the situation affected specifically LGBTI asylum seekers or asylum seekers who apply for asylum because they have been persecuted in their country of origin because of their sexual orientation or gender identity? Well, first of all, I was talking about the obstacles in legal migration routes. This has affected all migrants, but it has specifically affected LGBT migrants, especially from Latin America, for example. Many LGBT persons from Latin America have to flee their countries, have to go to another country because they are being persecuted in their country. And Spain was one of the main countries where they came to apply for asylum because of the cultural context, of course, and because of the language. And obviously, the only way that Latin American migrants have to get to Spain is through an airplane, so through a legal route. And this, of course, has been severely restricted during all the pandemic. So it has made it even more difficult for specifically for LGBT migrants and asylum seekers from Latin America to get to Spain because international flights have been severely restricted, as you know. And also it has affected LGBT migrants from Africa, which is also one of the main areas of the world where LGBT persons have to face persecution as well, and many of them have no other option but to leave the country and to apply for asylum. And of course, the obstaculization of the legal routes to go from different African countries to get to Spain has been severely affected by the pandemic. So this puts these people even into more danger because they have to go through illegal routes and unsafe routes, which can be really, really dangerous to them. Also, I was talking before about the changes in the decision-making process in the asylum system, and about these second interviews for asylum seekers that used to take place before the pandemic, and that now, at the moment, they are not taking place. And this was especially important for LGBT asylum seekers because second interviews were very important in these cases. We are talking about cases which are deeply personal and where the testimony of the person is very important. So in many of these cases, the person who had to take the decision of the asylum case needed a second interview with the person to get to know the case a bit better. Now this is not taking place, this is not happening. So many asylum cases for sexual orientation or gender identity are not being properly assessed. They are not being properly studied in order to make a correct decision. Also, as I told before, there has been an acceleration of the decision-making process. So this means we have less time to prepare the case. And also the LGBT asylum seeker has less time to build trust to build trust in the system, to build trust also in the lawyer if they have the opportunity to get the help of a lawyer, and this can affect the way they present the case. Maybe those people they don't have enough trust in the system in order to explain their story, in order to explain what has happened to them. And also because of the pandemic, they have less access to legal aid, so less access to get this information, because before they go through this first asylum interview, so they have less time and less opportunity to build trust in that. And that means, for example, before the pandemic, we had the chance to meet personally with asylum seekers several times in person. So obviously this helped them a lot to build trust in the lawyer and to prepare the interview. And of course, with the pandemic, especially during the first part of the pandemic, during the lockdown, this was not possible. We couldn't meet in person, so we needed to prepare the interview online or even by telephone. And obviously, this affected their trust in the lawyer as well. And also, I wanted to mention that because of the pandemic, all of us had to go through a social distance measure, but this has especially affected LGBT migrants and asylum seekers. It is very important for LGBT migrants to find a safe space for socialization. And it's very important for them to find a space to find a peer group, a group of equals, where they can find this sense of integration and solidarity and to feel less lonely. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has deeply affected this possibility for them. So I would like to finish by saying, in my opinion, what do we need in order to assess those problems? Well, first of all, and this applies to all migrants and all asylum seekers, we need safe and legal migration routes, obviously respecting COVID-19 restrictions, but we need to we need to boost these legal and safe migration routes in order not to put people into danger. And this applies to LGBT asylum seekers and migrants, but to all migrants in general as well. It is also very important, and this was important also before the pandemic, we need to train decision makers, especially, so I mean asylum decision makers, on sexual and gender diversity. In many cases, authorities who take the decisions, who make the decisions in asylum cases and LGBT asylum cases, they don't have the necessary knowledge or tools in order to study the case and make the correct decision. It is also very important to make sure that all asylum seekers, and especially those who apply for asylum, for example, for their sexual orientation or gender identity, that they have access to specialized legal assistance. Nowadays, in Spain, it's not compulsory for an asylum seeker to have a lawyer during the asylum process. It is a right that they have, it is a possibility, but it's not compulsory. So in the reality, many of them, they don't have access to a lawyer to prepare the interview, to prepare the case, to build this trust that they need in order to present their case. So it is important that we focus on giving specialized legal assistance, and even more so during a pandemic with all the obstacles that this implies. And finally, we need to find safe spaces for socialization for LGBT migrants and refugees, even during a pandemic. We know this was impossible during the first part of the pandemic, but now we need to find new spaces that are safe, not only safe in the health meaning of safe, which also needs to be safe, of course, in front of the COVID-19, but it needs to be safe space for them to find a group of equals, to find a peer group, and to at the end of the day to feel less lonely in this situation. It's a very important step in their social well-being, in their mental well-being, and also in their social integration. So that would be all for my part. It was a pleasure to share with you our experience with LGBT asylum seekers and migrants from Spain. And I will be very happy to share with you any comment or any question that you may have now or at the end of the session.
Natasha or Ismini, if you want to introduce the speakers from Greece, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Ilaria, to Anthony for the presentations. They were very interesting, and it is good to know and check the similarities, the gaps, the things that all partner countries should have in mind that need to be treated. For us, I am very happy to introduce to you Mrs. Rania Sad, who is an interpreter working in support services for migrants and refugees. We will begin with her speech, and later on, Mr. Anista Alexandros Barawi. Did I say it correctly, Anis? Perfect. Who is an interpreter, a community interpreter in mental health settings. Both of them were trained in the frame of Netcare project, and they're also following almost every activity of the project, and we are very happy to have them with us. They have rich experience to share, and let's begin with Rania. Rania will make her speech in Greek, and after that I will interpret in English to facilitate better communication. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, kalimera σε όλους.
Hello, kalimera.
Η βία κατά των γυναικών είναι η έκφραση μιας παγιωμένης επί αιώνες νοοτροπίας. Κυριάρχει σε πολλές χώρες, μεταξύ των οποίων είναι και η χώρα μας, που για να αποτιναχθεί απαιτείται η συστράτευση κάθε δύναμης, με επικεφαλής τη δύναμη της παιδείας και ακολούθως την δύναμη της δικαιοσύνης.
Violence against women is an expression of attitudes consolidated for centuries in many countries, including our country. To tackle it, we need to use all available means, beginning from strengthening the systems of education and justice.
Το φαινόμενο της ενδοοικογενειακής βίας εν μέσω lockdown είναι παγκόσμιο. Δεν έχει σύνορα, δεν έχει κοινωνική διαστρωμάτωση, δεν αφορά συγκεκριμένα εισοδηματικά κριτήρια, είναι παγκόσμιο και δεν κάνει διακρίσεις.
Domestic violence during lockdown is a global phenomenon. There is no border. It does not have to do with social status or income. It is global and concerns all.
Τόσο τα ίδια τα θύματα, όσο και ο κύκλος τους, διστάζουν ή δίσταζαν να μιλήσουν για το πρόβλημα. Ο φόβος και η άγνοια για τα δικαιώματά τους, αλλά και τα διαθέσιμα μέσα υποστήριξής τους, είναι οι καθοριστικοί παράγοντες της σιωπής τους.
The victims and their social environment are or were afraid to talk about the problem. Fear and not knowing the rights and the available means of support are determining factors of this silence.
Ο ορισμός της βίας κατά των γυναικών, σύμφωνα με τη Σύμβαση του Συμβουλίου της Ευρώπης, Σύμβαση της Κωνσταντινούπολης, ξεκαθαρίζει τα πράγματα για κάθε είδους βία. Ως βία κατά των γυναικών νοείται η παραβίαση των ανθρωπίνων δικαιωμάτων και μια μορφή διάκρισης κατά των γυναικών και σημαίνει όλες τις πράξεις μιας βίας βασιζόμενης στο φύλο, οι οποίες έχουν ως αποτέλεσμα φυσική, σεξουαλική, ψυχολογική ή οικονομική βλάβη ή πόνο για τις γυναίκες, συμπεριλαμβανομένων των απειλών τέλεσης τέτοιων πράξεων, τον εξαναγκασμό ή την αυθαίρετη αποστέρηση της ελευθερίας, είτε αυτή συμβαίνει στο δημόσιο, είτε στο ιδιωτικό βίο.
The definition of violence against women, according to Istanbul Convention, is a violation of human rights and a form of discrimination against women. It includes all acts of violence, a violence based on gender, which can result to physical, sexual, psychological, or financial harm or pain for women, including threats of performing such actions, enforcement, or deprivation of freedom, and it can either happen in the private or public life.
Κορονοϊός και ενδοοικογενειακή βία. Όσο ο κορονοϊός μένεται σε όλο τον κόσμο, οι χώρες καταγράφουν μεγάλη αύξηση της ενδοοικογενειακής βίας. Συγκεκριμένα στην Ευρώπη, τα κράτη-μέλη καταγράφουν πάνω από 60% αύξηση στις κλήσεις έκτακτης ανάγκης από γυναίκες που έχουν υποστεί βία από τους συντρόφους τους σε σχέση με άλλες χρονιές. Και τα ηλεκτρονικά μηνύματα σε υπηρεσίες άμεσης εξυπηρέτησης για την πρόληψη της βίας αυξήθηκαν 5 φορές.
As the COVID pandemic expands all over the world, the countries record a great increase of domestic violence. In Europe, an increase over 60% in emergency calls is recorded from women who have been abused by their partners in relation to past years, while electronic messages in support services increased 5 times.
Η βία δεν είναι προσωπική υπόθεση. Αν δείτε κάτι, πείτε το.
Violence is not a private matter. If you notice something, say it.
Δυστυχώς, η περίοδος του εγκλισμού εκτείναξε τις καταγγελίες για κακοποίηση γυναικών. Είναι ένα φαινόμενο που δεν συνέβη μόνο στην Ελλάδα. Είναι ένα παγκόσμιο φαινόμενο.
Unfortunately, restriction in houses increased the numbers of abuse of women. It is a phenomenon that did not occur only in Greece, it is a global one.
Οι γυναίκες πολλές φορές δεν μιλούν, είτε γιατί φοβούνται τι θα πει ο κοινωνικός και οικογενειακός περίερός τους, είτε γιατί εξαρτώνται οικονομικά από το σύντροφό τους. Παράλληλα, υπάρχει και ένα ταμπού για το πώς θα μεγαλώσουν τα παιδιά χωρίς πατέρα. Είναι και ο λόγος που οι γυναίκες δεν καταγγέλνουν τη βίαιη συμπεριφορά που υφίστανται.
Women many times do not speak about it, either because they are afraid of what the social and family environment will say, or because they are financially dependent on their partners. At the same time, there is a taboo on how their children will grow up without a father. This is also the reason that women do not report abuse.
Η βία κατά των γυναικών έχει ευρύ φάσμα, ξεκινάει από την λεκτική παρενόχληση μέχρι την ανθρωποκτονία ή αλλιώς την γυναικοκτονία.
Violence against women has a wide range of types. It may begin from oral harassment and lead to homicide, or in other words, femicide.
Εξαιτίας της πανδημίας, ο ΟΗΕ προέβλεψε ότι το ποσοστό φτώχειας των γυναικών θα αυξηθεί κατά 9,1%, καθώς και η κρίση κατέστησε τις θέσεις εργασίας των γυναικών 1,8 φορές πιο ευάλωτες σε σχέση με εκείνες των ανδρών.
Because of the pandemic, the United Nations predict that the rate of women's poverty will increase by 9.1% as the financial crisis made the jobs of women 1.8 times more vulnerable than those of men.
Η επιβολή καραντίνας έχει οδηγήσει επίσης σε υγειονομικά και οικονομικά προβλήματα που δυναμητίζουν ακόμα περισσότερο την βία στα πλαίσια της οικογένειας.
Lockdown has also led to health and financial problems that reinforce even more domestic violence.
Όλοι αντιμετωπίζουμε σημαντικές ψυχολογικές προκλήσεις κατά τη διάρκεια της απομόνωσης ή της καραντίνας, αλλά οι αντοχές των γυναικών και μερικές φορές των παιδιών που βρίσκονται σε μη ασφαλή σπίτια αντιμετωπίζουν εξουθενωτικές δοκιμασίες. Εμείς λοιπόν οφείλουμε να δώσουμε ιδιαίτερη προσοχή σε αυτό το θέμα και να επεκτείνουμε τις δράσεις μας για να βάλουμε τέλος στη βία κατά των γυναικών. Δεν θα αφήσουμε τις γυναίκες και τα παιδιά μόνα τους.
We all face important psychological challenges during the isolation or the lockdown. However, women and sometimes children located in unsafe houses face overwhelming challenges. Therefore, we have to pay special attention to the victims and extend our actions to put an end to violence against women. We will not leave women and children alone.
Καλούμε όλα τα κράτη και τους φορείς να αντιμετωπίσουν αυτό το πρόβλημα με αποφασιστικότητα και να κάνουν ευρέως γνωστό πού και με ποιον τρόπο τα θύματα ενδοοικογενειακής βίας μπορούν να ζητήσουν βοήθεια. Αυτό πρέπει να περιλαμβάνει απλούς τρόπους επικοινωνίας και ενημέρωσης της αστυνομίας, όπως γραπτά μηνύματα ή διαδικτυακή συνομιλία, καθώς και χρήση κωδικών λέξεων σε ιατρούς και φαρμακοποιούς. Επιπλέον, πρέπει να αυξηθούν οι διαθέσιμες θέσεις σε εγκαταστάσεις προστασίας θυμάτων ενδοοικογενειακής βίας και σε καταφύγια γυναικών. Επίσης, θα πρέπει τα κράτη να στηρίξουν οικονομικά τα θύματα και να τα βοηθήσουν να ξεπεράσουν την κρίση.
We call on all states and services to deal with this problem with determination and to spread the knowledge regarding where and how domestic violence victims can ask for help. This should include simple ways of contacting and informing the police, like sending electronic messages or digital communication or keywords to medical staff. In addition, the availability of protection facilities and women's shelters must be increased. The states should also support the victims financially and help them overcome this crisis.
Η πανδημία του COVID-19 τονίζει την ανισότητα των φύλων σε όλες τις μορφές. Σύμφωνα με τις στατιστικές, το 70% του εργατικού δυναμικού στον τομέα της υγείας είναι γυναίκες. Ένα μεγάλο μέρος μη αμοιβόμενων υπηρεσιών φροντίδας γίνεται από γυναίκες και η επερχόμενη οικονομική κρίση θα επηρεάσει περισσότερα τις γυναίκες. Σε περιόδους κρίσης, αστάθειας και οικονομικού στρες, παρατηρείται μια αύξηση στα περιστατικά ενδοοικογενειακής βίας και αυτό συμβαίνει και στην περίπτωση της πανδημίας.
COVID-19 pandemic increases gender inequality in all types. According to statistics, 70% of staff working in the field of healthcare are women. A large part of non-paid services is made by women, and the coming financial crisis will affect them even more. In periods of crisis, instability and stress about financial matters increase incidents of domestic violence, and this happens also now during the pandemic.
Τα θύματα ενδοοικογενειακής βίας που είναι απομονωμένα στα σπίτια τους έχουν περιορισμένη δυνατότητα να ζητήσουν βοήθεια και να απευθυνθούν σε φορείς και νομικούς παραστάτες, επειδή ο σύντροφός τους είναι επίσης στο σπίτι. Εγκλωβισμένες όχι μόνο στο σπίτι, αλλά και σε καταστάσεις που ενώ θέλουν, νιώθουν πως δεν μπορούν να σταματήσουν. Έτσι ζουν χιλιάδες γυναίκες, καθώς η εφαρμογή αυστηρών μέτρων για την αποφυγή της διασποράς του κορονοϊού και η καραντίνα της απομόνωσε σε ήδη βία ή ασφυκτικά περιβάλλοντα και ανέδειξε τη βία σε μια άκρως ανησυχητικά εκτινόμενη συμπεριφορά.
The victims of domestic violence are isolated at home and have limited opportunity to ask for help from services or legal counselors because the abusive partners are also at home. Restricted not only in their house, but in situations that they feel that they cannot confront. This is the way thousands of women live as the application of strict measures to avoid the spread of the pandemic and lockdown isolated them in violent or suffocating environments and highlighted the increase of violence as extremely concerning.
Η βία κατά των γυναικών είναι φαινόμενο που οφείλεται ξεκάθαρα στην στερεοτυπική αντίληψη περί της κατωτερότητας του φύλου των γυναικών.
Violence against women is a phenomenon that is rooted to stereotypes about women's inferiority. May I interrupt? Did it take a lot of time? Do we need to cut the... Marianella, have we exceeded the time? Because I don't have... Do you need us to limit our presentation, not to exceed our time?
Since the translation is online, it's quite normal. We are doubling the length of time. Anyway, if you can go
Okay.
the conclusion. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Welcome. So let's, Rania would suggest that I would suggest that we move on to what victims of domestic violence should do, which is the substance of our presentation. What would you say? Let's go to what the victims should do. The last part of the presentation. Για το τι πρέπει να κάνουν τα θύματα της βίας.
Ναι. Θα κάνουμε, συνεχίζουμε.
Ναι.
Η ενδοοικογενειακή βία είναι μια πανδημία μέσα στην πανδημία, λένε οι ειδικοί.
Συγγνώμη, Ρανιά, να πάμε στο κομμάτι ως προς το τι τα θύματα πρέπει να κάνουν.
Στο τέλος, ναι. Λοιπόν, πρώτον θα πρέπει να καλέσουν αμέσως το 100. Εάν δεν μπορούν να μιλήσουν, να στείλουν γραπτό μήνυμα, SMS, στο 100, με την ακριβή διεύθυνση, το ονοματεπώνυμο και το είδος της επίγουσας ανάγκης. Για παράδειγμα, δέχομαι βία, κινδυνεύει η ζωή μου. Ακόμη μπορούν να μετάβουν σε πλησιέστερο αστυνομικό τμήμα, να επικοινωνήσουν με τις υπηρεσίες ενδοοικογενειακής βίας της ελληνικής αστυνομίας ή αν δεν μπορούν να ειδοποιήσουν τις αρχές, να ζητήσουν από κάποιον άλλον να το κάνει, όπως από κάποιον οικείο πρόσωπο ή το γιατρό. Οποιονδήποτε γνωρίζει κάποιον ή κάποια που υφίσταται ενδοοικογενειακή βία μπορεί να το καταγγείλει. Στην Ελλάδα τα θύματα μπορούν να καλούν και τη γραμμή SOS 15900 της Γενικής Γραμματείας Οικογενειακής Πολιτικής και Ισότητας των Φύλων για ψυχοκοινωνική στήριξη, νομική συμβουλευτική ή φιλοξενία σε ξενώνες. Έχεις φωνή, είμαστε δίπλα σου. Συνεχίζω. Ζητούμε λοιπόν να υπάρξει πρόβλεψη για ενημερωτικό υλικό και λειτουργία του 15900 σε πολλές γλώσσες, ώστε να είναι προσβάσιμο σε προσφύγισσες και μετανάστριες, να συνεχιστεί και να ενισχυθεί η παροχή νομικής, συμβουλευτικής και ψυχοκοινωνικής στήριξης από τα συμβουλευτικά κέντρα της Γενικής Γραμματείας Οικογενειακής Πολιτικής και Ισότητας των Φύλων. Επίσης, να θεσπιστεί οικονομική ενίσχυση επιζώντων, ώστε να σταματήσει η οικονομική εξάρτηση από τον κακοποιητή τους και προκειμένου έτσι να μπορούν να φύγουν. Δυστυχώς όμως δεν υπάρχει αρκετή πρόνοια για πρόσφυγες και μετανάστριες που αποτελούν πλέον ένα σημαντικό ποσοστό του πληθυσμού της Ευρώπης και αυτής της χώρας.
What should victims of domestic violence do? First, they should call, the Greek line is 100, the police phone line, immediately. If they can't speak, they can send an electronic message with their address, name, and type of emergency. They can also go to the nearest police station or contact the social services of the police. If they cannot notify the authorities, they should ask someone else to do it, like a trusted person or a doctor. Anyone who knows someone experiencing domestic violence can file a complaint. In Greece, the victims can also call line 15900. This is the phone line for the Secretariat for Gender Equality, and to receive psychosocial support, legal advice, or a place to stay. You have a voice, we will stand by you. So, we ask for provision of information material and operation of line 15900 in many languages so that it is accessible to refugees and migrants. We ask to continue and strengthen the provision of legal support and psychosocial support from the counseling centers of the Secretariat for Gender Equality. Also, to establish financial support to violence survivors in order to stop the economic dependence on the abuser and make them able to leave the abusive environment. Unfortunately, there is not enough provision for refugees and migrants, who are now a significant percentage of Europe's population. Thank you, Rania, very much for your presentation. I hope that we have not taken a lot of time, but I think that all this that Rania has from her work needs to be heard, as well as for the victims to know where to turn to. And now I would like to move on to Anis for his presentation. I guess that he needs to share his screen for the PowerPoint.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Anista Alexandros from Greece. And as was mentioned before, I'm a community interpreter in mental health settings. And I also work as Integration Learning Center officer. And so firstly, I should be sharing with you not only my screen, but also the presentation in PDF file for all the attendees. So you all have the links that I have included in my presentation in your with you. So this should arrive in a couple of minutes, and I'm sharing my screen now. Just give me a second. Do you all see the PPT?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I have started working with Netcare project since the late of December 2020, and so it was a very enriching and a stimulating experience with all the participants and the the, the facilitators. And so let's make an outline of my presentation. These are the three pillars of the presentation: how to reinforce beneficiaries' participation in decision-making best practices. Second pillar, digital inclusion and challenges created due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And last pillar, support services to LGBT+, migrants, refugees, identify confusion, how to talk to an intersex person. Moving on. So I have tried to be as concise as possible. The overall experience during the COVID and working with sexual gender-based violence survivors cannot be mirrored, of course, through a couple of slides. However, I do hope I did my best to have an explanatory presentation. And of course, as I mentioned before, all links are included in the presentation as hyperlinks for further reference. So as we can see here, this is the Hearts ladder. This is a ladder scheme that is used mainly for children and youths to describe the participation level in a professional practice. So from the picture, as you can see, we are starting from the bottom, which is all these three practices are considered as non-participation, starting from manipulation. So manipulation participation occurs when children and youths do not understand the issue motivation, participatory process, or the role in that process. According to Hart's ladder, sometimes adults or professionals feel that the end justifies the means. So if children have no understanding of the issues and hence do not understand their actions, then this is manipulation. Moving on to decoration. Decoration.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have a message in the chat that the slides are not moving.
Okay. What about now?
No.
Yes. No?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Apologies. Okay. So, okay, this should be the first time that you see now the Hertz ladder, most of you. So this is the Hertz ladder again. Moving on to decoration. It's the second practice. Occurs when children and youths are put to public display during an event, performance, or other activity organized for a specific purpose, but they do not understand the meaning or intent of their involvement. And lastly, tokenism. Tokenism occurs in those instances in which children or beneficiaries are apparently given a voice, but in fact have little or no choice about the subject of the style of communicating it, and little or no opportunity to formulate their own opinions. This comes really close to the interpretation and the cultural mediation problem that might occur. And now, moving on to the participation practices. Firstly, we are still moving from the bottom to the top. We have the first practice, assign but inform. So this participation means that occurs when the children, youths, or beneficiaries understand the intention of the project, know who made the decisions concerning their involvement, and why, have a meaningful rather than a decorative role, and volunteer for the project after the project was made clear to them. So we see that there we have, let's say, a more inclusive participation in one's decision making. Afterwards, we have consulted and informed, that occurs when beneficiaries act as consultants for, let's say, professionals in a manner which has great integrity. The project is designed, the decision is designed and run by beneficiaries, but the beneficiaries understand the process and their opinions are treated seriously. Moving on to adult-initiated shared decisions with beneficiaries' children participation that constitutes adult-initiated. Shared with decisions with children occurs when adults initiate participatory projects, but they share decision-making authority or management with children.
Anis, could you please also move to the next slides because they're not moving?
Okay. No, this is correct, I think. No, yes. You should be seeing the participation.
Okay, thank you, I'm sorry.
It's okay. So the last two practices are children initiated and directed. Participation that is children initiated, or of course beneficiaries initiated, and directed occurs when beneficiaries and youths conceptualize and carry out complex projects by working cooperatively in small and or large groups. While professionals may observe and assist the children, they do not interfere with their process or play a directive or managerial role. And lastly, so this is, let's say, the full practice of participation in one's decision making. Child-initiated shared decisions with adults, participation that constitutes child-initiated shared decision with adults occurs when children, though primarily teenage youths in this case, share decision-making authority, management, or power with adults, partners, and allies. So, moving on to the next slide. Let's see the best practices that I have identified, 6 steps towards one's participation. What can we do instead? So, first of all, we can outline the processes. The beneficiaries should know what we are doing, and this should be shared with them orally and be explicit. Then reserve time specifically for our people. Make people feel welcome. Use language they understand. This correlates with the interpretation itself during a session. Let your people's voice be heard. Don't be defensive about receiving criticism, and appreciate participation. So this is all about the first pillar of participation, and I should be moving on to digital inclusion. So digital inclusion. What is digital inclusion? and what is the interplay between social inclusion during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, based on the research conducted within the mapping of digital inclusion of Medici project, I think most of you might be or should be aware of this project already. Digital inclusion has become a part of people's daily life, let alone women, and nowadays affect nearly all spheres of people's life. The significance of this topic has attracted Europe's interest with several funded projects, and at this point, I strongly support that this should be my focus during this conference. Accordingly, we will be certainly needing a multidimensional approach, as all of the previous participants have said, and professionals with multiple and cross-cutting skills in order to achieve the anticipated participation level. Gender-based discrimination in terms of accessibility to digitalization mirrors the social inequalities, and that a male should be taking charge of a situation when a crisis arises. You can all go ahead and take a look at this project as the link is included. Moving on to another article, which is called A Digital Inclusion Pathway. Of David Mallows. So David Mallows suggests in his article that there are strong links between the use of digital tools and various economic and social indicators. This opens into certain groups of adults and minorities falling behind their peers in terms of adoption. Lower income groups often simply lack the necessary hardware and devices. Therefore, it is far more difficult to have access to service, especially during the COVID-19 period, when everything has become accessible remotely with no physical contact. As proposed by Professor Steve of Portland State University, a 4-stage pathway to digital inclusion mirrors the diversity and the complexity of this challenge, as you all can see here. Thus, we can learn a lot from it and then identify the group of individuals we are working with and their special needs. So, what are the lessons learned, acquired? The need of modernization. We should modernize and adopt our practices. Reevaluation of procedures tailored to people's need. And lastly, working together, an holistic approach. These are two artificial intelligence tools that I think that might come at handy for our beneficiaries. The first one is called Gonna Connect. It's the world's first messaging chatbot empowering survivors of domestic violence. So this should be downloaded. This can be downloaded on a survivor's device, and it is very discreet. And let's say it's a chat box where the survivors can find empowerment. And then we have Replica, which is an AI companion who cares, listens, and talks, always on your side. It's also a type of chat box where people can, let's say, talk to and have interaction with during the COVID-19 pandemic and during the lockdown. And lastly, the last pillar of my presentation should be how to talk to a trans person. Because I think we have exceeded much our time. I am not going to be saying much about it. That's why I have shared the PDF folder with you. You can all check the link here. They have different brochures for different professionals, or let's say role, as an educator, as a doctor, and as a parent, where people are being, let's say, educated on how to refer to a trans person. And I'm going to present in two cases really quickly that I have dealt with during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was quite a challenge. So the first one is a Tunisian migrant trans woman who faced difficulty into finding welcoming network and to rent a house because of her gender. At the same time, we had another person, a gay male from Syria, who was kicked out of his house because of his sexual orientation. And so those two were trying to find an apartment in order to be smoothly integrated to the Greek society. And they couldn't find a match because, of course, you cannot rent a house that easily when you're alone. So during the COVID pandemic, we couldn't identify the needs, the risks. We had only distant communication and intervention. And most of the times, beneficiaries had low data, and our working hours were from 9 to 5. So most of these people during this time frame, they were out of their houses, they were in the streets seeking for help. So unfortunately, we could not find them during this hour. So our communication was a challenge. It was time consuming, and we were risking to lose landlords' interest to rent the house and match them together, but we managed to do it. So this was, let's say, a positive outcome of this incident, this case. And the second case is with the domestic violence survivors, with a family, and where the woman actually was experiencing domestic violence. We couldn't get in touch with her. Her brother and her husband had taken her phone. And as I said before, during the COVID pandemic restrictions, we didn't have any reason, and we actually were prohibited to invite beneficiaries to our premises. So we have tried multiple times and multiple approaches to reach to her, but unfortunately we couldn't. Therefore, we lost contact. So these two contradictory, let's say, to the outcome cases highlights the necessity of keeping touch with the survivors. And during the pandemic, this was our biggest challenge. So thank you. I hope I did not talk too much and I did not tire you. And thank you.
Thank you, Anis. You didn't tire us at all. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences.
Beatrice, if you want to introduce your colleague, thank you.
Yes, of course. So now we have Miguel Ángel Hidalgo Medina, who is an activist with an extensive career in the labor and social field. And he has experience as an employing counselor for groups at risk of exclusion and accompanying of people with HIV addiction problems, and women in the context of prostitution, among others. He is member of the Men's Association for Equality of Andalusia and militant of Lost Causes, as he loves to speak about, and father of 2 teenage daughters that increase his experience with the Lost Causes. And so he is going to talk about migrant women victims of sexual exploitation during the pandemic and the invisibility of the problem in Spain. So Miguel Ángel, thank you very much for your presence in this final conference for the project Netcare today. I give you the floor when you want.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Espero que se me oiga bien y se vea la presentación, ¿verdad?
I hope you can all see the screen.
Vale. Bueno, pues nada, buenas tardes a todas, incluidos también a la gente de Italia, aunque no eliminó de la Eurocopa de fútbol.
To the Italian people and also to Greece.
Me gustaría un poco sintetizar un tema bastante complejo, pero
briefly about this issue, which is very complicated. I am going to try to provide some key aspects.
Vale, ahora no me deja. Vale. Yo trabajo, soy voluntario de hace varios años en
work as a volunteer at Proyecto Candela, which provides accompaniment of women in the context of prostitution. The name is related to heat, to a dwelling. I think it's very symbolic to refer to accompaniment. I am going to briefly explain which was the situation of these women before the pandemic. I would like to point out that the reality is very complex and that I am going to try to portray the more representative aspect of these women, even though the problematic is very complex, as I was saying.
This is
a hidden problem. Anybody can see the lights of the clubs, but they are anonymous. It seems that they do not exist. It is obviously a business which moves a lot of money, and we do have to understand that the most of them are migrant women which are in an irregular administrative situation. There are also asylum seekers, and to have a brief landscape of these women, we have to pay attention to the stigma that these women are suffering. It is very easy to put ourselves in their place and about how difficult it is for them to have access to social services and administrative services with their situation.
Desde el principio quiero dejar claro un poco nuestro posicionamiento. Nosotras somos objetivas pero no neutrales. Entendemos nuestro trabajo como de justicia social, de intentar dar a todas las personas los mismos derechos y oportunidades que tenemos las personas que estamos aquí. En ese sentido creo que hay un poema de Eduardo Galeano que ha adaptado un poco y que creo que representa bastante bien la realidad que sufren estas mujeres. Prefiero que lo leáis, ¿vale? Está en español y también está en inglés. Y es un poema muy famoso de los Nadie, pues he hecho una pequeña adaptación de las Nadie. ¿Va bien la traducción en inglés? Ahora mismo no la hago. Vale. Me voy a centrar a partir de ahora, entonces, en la situación durante el confinamiento y la pandemia. Son dos momentos diferentes.
Sorry, one second. I think there are some technical issues about the audio. If Miguel can speak slowly, Then we have the translation from Spanish to English, and then the translation to the other languages. Sorry about that. Thank you very much.
Just to be sure, do you hear me? Just to be sure.
And lately, no. The last part we didn't hear.
Oh, okay, but am I expected to speak at the same time? I mean, am I expected to do simultaneous translation?
No simultaneous translation. Thank you very much.
Okay, so
thank you.
Maybe Miguel Angel make a pause every certain time so that I can translate what he says. Okay, thank you very much. Much appreciated. I'm sorry about this confusion.
No, you translated very well. It's just a problem for the other translators to the other languages. So it's not, thank you.
So yeah, it's important that then Miguel leaves you the space from
okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, everybody.
Vale. Si lo he entendido bien, haré, digamos, una pausa entre presentación y presentación para que la otra compañera pueda introducir a otra. Vale. No voy a volver para atrás porque bueno, creo que no sería útil. Simplemente lo dejo aquí. Me interesa más la foto de post-pandemia más que lo antes.
Okay, I am not going to go back to the arguments I have handled before because I don't think it's very useful. I think it's more useful to focus on the post-pandemic situation. And this is why I'm going to move forward.
Espero un poquito para que puedan traducir un tiempo similar. No.
You can go, no problem.
Ahí está, vale. Bueno, durante el confinamiento, ¿vale? Diferente de la pandemia. Creo que podemos recordar que el confinamiento, por lo menos en España, duró 99 días, pero luego hubo varios cierres perimetrales y cierres de horario, de forma que ha habido clubes y ha habido mujeres que han estado un mes sin poder ingresar ningún dinero y sin poder trabajar. Un mes, no, perdón, 11 meses. Casi un año que han estado cerrados.
If we think about lockdown, you have to take into account that during 99 days in Spain, due to serious lockdown and also due to serious curfew, these women were unable to work during all these days. And after these 99 days, in which we were all locked down at home, several local and specific lockdowns and curfew succeeded. And this made that during 11 months, these women have not been able to work a single day.
Y además quiero que nos pongamos en su lugar porque no es solo sin ningún ingreso, sino sin ningún tipo de ayuda social, sin apoyo familiar y con muy poco ahorro. Yo no sé si las personas que estamos aquí seríamos capaces de sobrevivir en qué condiciones con 11 meses sin ningún tipo de ayuda. El hecho de que sean invisibles para la sociedad tiene como consecuencia por este tipo de situaciones, que no pueden recibir ninguna ayuda ni ningún tipo de apoyo.
We have to, again, consider the fact that they had no income, but they have neither any kind of economic aid or support or grant, nor any kind of savings. So no one would be able to survive during 11 months without any kind of income as they did.
Vale, estas son algunas de las fuentes, no me voy a detener, pero sí me parece muy interesante la de las oblatas, porque son en varios países, Italia, Portugal, España, dos de ellos estamos representados aquí, y también contrastados con nuestra experiencia en el terreno. ¿Vale? Voy a intentar...
Please go to the other slide, please. So I'm going to briefly show you the sources of my speech. If you can go back, okay. So I just would like to point out and to emphasize, which I have consulted the Oblates Europe report, which I find very interesting because it was conducted in 2 countries which are participating today here, Italy, Spain, besides Portugal. but I'm not going to go into the details of every sources I have consulted.
Dentro del tema de abordar a la prostitución he intentado hacerlo por partes, una especie de cajones, por si pensando que podía ser más útil para comprenderlo, ¿no? Entonces, relacionado con los proxenetas, el negocio, entendiéndolo para algunos, no ha parado, pero se ha disminuido. Hay algunas chicas que nos comentaban que durante el confinamiento algunos clientes aprovechaban para pasar el perro para comprar prostitución. Los clubes han permanecido cerrados, algunos han echado a las mujeres, le ha dado igual, otros la han dejado allí, pero incrementando su gasto y su deuda. Respecto a la calle, ha desaparecido porque temen más a las multas que al COVID. Algunas recuerdo que están en situación irregular y los pisos ha sido un poco donde se han trasladado todas las que han podido.
Okay, I have structured this presentation in several slides, which represent several boxes of this situation. The first box deals with the pimps, and which obviously are one of the main role of this issue, of this problem. Obviously, this business has not been interrupted. It has decreased, but it has not been interrupted. So we have had some people who were allegedly going to walk the dog out, and instead they were going to use the service of a prostitute. So we have been said, we have been informed of the fact that this business has not been interrupted at all during the pandemics. Obviously, many clubs have closed, and when they have closed, or either they have expelled prostitutes or they have been left inside, which again has caused an increase of the expenses they have to pay for being in those clubs. The street has disappeared, obviously, and prostitutes had more fear to fines than they have to COVID. And the great help for these women has been obviously the apartments where they have been taken, but however they have suffered from an enhanced, more traumatic social isolation.
Respecto a los pisos, nuestra experiencia es que es un lugar especialmente difícil para que la ONG podamos entrar y donde las condiciones sanitarias no se cumplen en absoluto, ¿vale? Ha habido muchísimas mujeres con positivo de COVID durante el primer momento porque cuando alguien tenía síntomas lo que es que la quitaban de los clientes, pero no la aislaban ni había un mínimo de atención sanitaria. Luego quiero decir que la frase que voy a poner siempre abajo en morado son frases textuales que nos han dicho las mujeres respecto a algunos de estos temas.
With regard to the apartments to which these prostitutes have been taken, we have to point out, I would like to point out the fact that even though they have been not in the street but in these apartments, it is a place very difficult to reach by us. I mean, we cannot have access to those apartments, and we know that the sanitary conditions in these apartments are scarce or even non-existent at all. And we have been also informed of the fact that when they got COVID, they were put aside clients or customers, but they were not put in quarantines or anything like that. So again, the sanitary conditions they have endured during the pandemic have been fearless and dreadful. I would also like to point out the fact that when I quote something in Lila, in purple down there, it's the testimony of one of those women, one of those prostitutes we have spoken to. So these quotes here in purple are the real statements of the prostitutes we work with.
Respecto a las mujeres, voy a poner dos transparencias, es lo que más nos importa. Y aquí solo destacar, podríamos hablar mucho, pero quiero destacar la extrema necesidad que nos hemos encontrado que nunca hemos visto en los años anteriores, ¿no? Y otras compañeras que llevan más tiempo nos dicen igual. Por ejemplo, es la primera vez que hemos tenido que llevar comida, literalmente no teníamos para comer, y hemos tenido que comprar medicina y hemos tenido que llevar mascarillas, ¿no? Hay una ONG que la hacía ciudadana y nos la daba para que las lleváramos las mujeres, ¿no? Entonces, una frase que decíamos mucho, que solo el pueblo salva al pueblo. Por destacar de esta transparencia, bueno, vale.
From the women perspective, there's a lot of things to say, but I would like to focus on the cases of extreme need we have witnessed it during the pandemic. We have not ever seen any situation as such before. We have been forced to bring food to these apartments, medicines, and masks. We had an NGO which was collaborating with us, and they were providing these masks. And we took this mask, we brought these masks to the apartments so that they can make use of them. And these are cases of extreme need that, again, we had not seen before.
Destacar simplemente que hemos encontrado varias mujeres que acceden a la prostitución por primera vez, dada la situación económica, o que vuelven tras varios años no habiendo estado ahí, habiendo trabajado en otras cosas, pero haber perdido el trabajo, se han visto obligadas a volver varios años después. En la frase de abajo yo creo que lo resume bastante bien. Y lo de retorno voluntario quiere decir a sus países, ¿no? Algunas personas, sobre todo de origen rumano, le tenían un poco más fácil, han preferido irse en lugar de estar aquí gastando más dinero.
I would like to emphasize also the cases, the numerous cases of women who have engaged in prostitution for the first time because of the need they have. This is very representative. For example, if we pay attention to the quote in the slide, which says, in the morning I send the CV and then I come here to eat. I mean, due to the extreme need they were enduring, many women have to engage in prostitution for the first time, and some other have returned to do the same, or some other, in their cases, for their part, have returned to the countries of origin.
Todo esto, lógicamente, ha tenido un impacto emocional muy fuerte. Aquí destacar pues, que el proyecto migratorio se ha roto. La gente viene para ayudar a su familia, de las que dependen de ella económicamente, y al no poder tener ingresos, pues todo el dolor, el sufrimiento que se produce. Y destacar un poco las emociones del último punto, ¿no? Incertidumbre, angustia, crisis, ansiedad, soledad, tristeza, miedo, estrés, indefensión y problemas un poco de autoestima.
It should be noted that the immigration project has been interrupted, has been torn apart. I mean, they had a project to come here and to support their families, and now these women are unable to do so. And this obviously causes a lot of pain and psychological stress, uncertainty, anguish, anxiety, loneliness, sadness, fear, and all these feelings that we all can understand, I think, very easily.
Respecto a los hombres que consumen prostitución, decir que si antes era un privilegio del cual abusaban, pues ahora todavía más, ¿no? Han intentado aprovechar la situación para regatear, saber que las mujeres necesitan el dinero y han intentado bajar los precios y poner sus condiciones, tanto de algunas prácticas sexuales como no usar preservativo y, por supuesto, no usar mascarilla. Y también otro dato importante es que se ha notado más índice de agresividad. Toda esa ansiedad y tensión que ellos sufrían, como cualquiera, por la pandemia, pues la descargaban con las mujeres y ha habido más situaciones de agresividad.
Mhm. From the perspective of men who use prostitution, we can point out the fact that the situation of privilege that these men enjoy has been reinforced during the pandemic. They have felt more empowered, for example, to put prices down or to impose their conditions to these women. For example, the fact that they refuse to use condoms or to use masks, which were conditions obviously dangerous for these women, but they felt empowered to impose in this exceptional situation. These men were obviously more tense and they have also more pressure due to the pressure that we were all feeling during the pandemic. And it's been noticed that this pressure has been discharged against prostitutes. So they have suffered even more violence and tension than the one they usually feel.
Esto nos hace recordar una frase de una filósofa feminista, Ana de Miguel, la podéis leer: la prostitución es una escuela de desigualdad humana. Creo que es importante recordarlo.
Mm-hmm. This reminds me to a famous quote of Ana de Miguel, which says that prostitution is a school of human inequality. And I think it's something very important to be highlighted.
Respecto al papel de la administración pública a diferentes niveles, local o autonómica o nacional, dos ideas clave. En general, creemos que ha sido una oportunidad perdida para acercarse a este colectivo, puesto que las ayudas de emergencia no han llegado a ella. Y en positivo, el ejemplo de las Islas Baleares, que sí ha tenido una respuesta de urgencia, se llama plan de contingencia, donde se le ha dado alguna ayuda económica y alojamiento. Y a largo plazo ha hecho un proyecto de intervención con 150 mujeres con una ayuda de alojamiento, económica, psicológica y jurídica para ayudar a que quien lo desee pueda abandonar la prostitución.
Mm-hmm. With regard to the response of the public administration to tackle this situation of prostitution, we have to highlight two key aspects. As a negative aspect, I would like to highlight that we have missed the opportunity to get closer to this group. And this group, prostitutes, have been unable to access to any kind of aid or support from the authorities. But let me also emphasize or stress a positive example, which comes from the Balearic government, which has provided an urgent response to the problem and has also developed a long-term intervention with 150 women with this issue, with this problem. And the government has provided housing support, economic support, and also legal support to these women. And this is also, we also have good examples, and I would like to also to introduce you to one of them so that we can be a bit more optimistic.
Respecto a la respuesta de la ONG, bueno, creo que quizá hemos actuado tarde, pero en general creo que hemos intentado estar a la altura, digámoslo así. A veces somos el único teléfono, la única cara amiga que estas mujeres tienen para acceder a determinada simplemente información, ya no solo recursos. Y bueno, destacar, como he dicho antes, la comida, que ha sido muy significativo, y se ha intentado hacer puente con algunos recursos de las administraciones, como es el ingreso mínimo vital, una ayuda de emergencia, y los empadronamientos. También hemos ayudado en ese tipo de tareas administrativas que ya es muy difícil que tengan acceso a esto.
The response of NGO, it may have been a bit late. Some delays have been seen, but even though we have made the most to face this situation and to provide support to this group of women. Sometimes we have to understand, we have to take into account that sometimes we are the only smiley face they have and the only place to resort to have access sometimes only to information, not also resources and food, although the case of providing food was so alarming and so important, as I was mentioning. But again, we have tried to be the welcoming face for them, to provide information, resources, and also to be the bridge with the administrations. We have tried to help them to get the minimum life income, which was an aid that was provided by the authorities, and it's very hard for them to have access to, and also to help them with the registration as inhabitants, as residents of the town hall where they live.
Bien, estas son las conclusiones. No me voy a detener en ellas, las podéis leer. Es un resumen de lo que he comentado en diferentes aspectos. Nada más.
These are the conclusions. I am not going to pay further attention to them because they are just a summary of what I have explained.
Y queremos terminar haciendo una reclamación, que lo que pedimos para estas mujeres no es caridad, es justicia. Para nosotras ha sido un ejemplo de fortaleza y de resiliencia, de cómo han soportado esta situación tan dura para todo el mundo, pero para ellas mucho más. Y lo que queremos es simplemente que tengan los mismos derechos y las mismas oportunidades que todas las personas que estamos aquí ahora.
And to end up with this presentation, I would like to stress the fact that we are not asking for charity. We are asking for justice. I think they have been a true example of resilience during these times, which have been so hard for all of us. And we only want them to be citizens with the same rights and the same opportunities that we all have.
Nada, muchas gracias y gracias también a Maite por la traducción y estoy a vuestra disposición si tenéis alguna duda.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the interpreter, and I'm available for you if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you to all the speakers. I know that someone has previous commitments, so I know that someone had to leave. But before concluding our conference and before going to a few questions.
Muchas gracias. Antes de terminar. Oh,
our colleague Chiara will move.
Sorry for that.
I think now it should work. Yeah. So thank you everybody once again, to all speakers. Your intervention were very interesting and they gave us many inputs and insights on the situation of migrant and refugee women and children surviving forms of violence, especially trafficking, domestic violence, and other forms of abuse. Now I would like to introduce Sandra Blessing. Sandra Blessing is a cultural mediator in different anti-trafficking agencies in our region, Tuscany region, here in Italy. She has a long-term experience in supporting survivors, children and women. And so I leave the floor to Sandra for our last presentation. And I ask her to be quite short since we are running late. Thank you. Thank you, Sandra.
I will try. Good day. My name is Sandra Blessing Chukwu. I'm a Nigerian in Abia State, Igbo by tribe. I'm a cultural mediator, ethno-clinic, and interpreter. I'll be slow to help the interpreter too. I work as an operator, a mediator with an association that helps women, victims of human trafficking and victims of domestic violence. In collaboration with CITES, anti-trafficking body, in Italy, my work is to help identify victims during interview. I collaborate with Oxfam Italy as a cultural mediator in hospital, consulting center for women. Also, in collaboration with ethnopsychologists and anthropology. I mediate mostly women from Nigeria, and 80% are from Edo State. At the beginning, when I started this work, for me, it wasn't like a real job, though it later became. I felt like it's a duty to help educate or inform women from my community about the law of this land. So each time I'm called upon to mediate, I always had one thing in mind, how to make them relax and to feel free. So as to understand that here is not like our country, where laws were never respected and people's privacy are ignored. I needed them to trust me, so I need to mellow to the same level with them. My greetings always starts with our broken English, how you dey. My facial contacts to them as to stay, I understand even without saying a word. My sitting position tells a lot. Eye contact, because I want them to see a non-judgmental person in front of them. I make them feel the empathy, even in translating. I often use the common and local pidgin while mediating, especially if I am yet to know the education level, so as not to appear acting superior. As a Nigerian, I know such thing pisses us off and they might close up. I encounter women with stories that bleeds the heart. Women who have been sold by their mother or a family member. Women who left home with their soon-to-be husband and was later sold off in Libya. Women whose husbands are the real traffickers. Girl child who is asked to claim adults. Girl child who has already been destroyed psychologically. Girl child who has lost confidence in themselves and in others. Women who have been given wrong information just to keep them as sex slaves. How do you save such person with the oaths they took back home? The threat to their families. For non-Africans, the oath might seem like a joke, but it is not. A lot of intervention, mediation to fight away the fear of being killed or made to go mad. The fear is real and cannot be dismissed. When they are asked to surrender their heads from their private parts, a drop of their blood in a fearful bowl covered with feathers of blood of a chicken. For Nigerians, blood is a sacred thing, and someone can hurt or kill you with that blood, no matter the distance. It's always a battle, convincing them otherwise. Sometimes I'm able to convince them, and sometimes I pray with them. At first, it was not easy for me to hear stories and not shed tears. But I was lucky enough to work with professionals and attending courses, some courses that prepared me psychologically to face the task ahead. There are some of these women who at first encounter, they open up, others don't. So it's understandable. They needed assurance for safety, and I know. I made them feel my heart with my house, with my words, and echo from my voice. They feel safe. Most times I told them how many years I've been in this country and how many years I have been in this job. I have to explain things I already know about the traffickers and how they need to do and what they need to do as to be safe in this land. It's always a two things. They are safe in Italy, but not safe for the families in Nigeria. I work with a team of professionals, starting from Oxfam Italia, STATIS, Organization for Anti-Trafficking, gynecologists, psychologists, psychiatry, and anthropology. Together, and with a lot of patience, we inform them of possibilities of being helped without actually reporting the traffickers to the police, as this might cause a lot of danger to the families at home. The idea of giving out names and phone numbers of their madam, as they call them, might put their families in great danger. But once they are sure they can get help without involving the police, then they are good to go. During the period of COVID, some of these women were not able to meet up with the weekly pay. So the madam threatens their families. It was a very bad period, I will say, for some. And to some, it was an opportunity they needed to sum up courage to seek for help. I was called upon many times for emergencies. I wouldn't like to take much of your time, but I would like to tell you only two out of number of cases I had to handle during the COVID period. A girl child and a lady with HIV positive. The girl child story is one of those stories that might seem like a fiction. She came from a poor home, left Nigeria at the age of 15 with a promise to continue schooling, an arrangement made by her own mother. On arrival in Italy, was asked to claim 19 years. She lived with her madam for four years, 2 years locked up in a room with bros coming to sleep with her. She called them bros. That was an order from her madam. In these 2 years, she never saw a doctor until she was almost 18. She said she had 3 abortions. 3 times, she aborted 3 times with the help of the madam who brought in drugs for her. I cannot say everything she told me, and I can't even describe the pain in her eyes, the hatred she now had for her mother. After some time, she was allowed to go to the street with other girls. Then boom, the COVID came calling, and she could not meet up to pay again. The madam tried organizing bros again. So bros mean brothers from African country, everyone are bros, is bros. To come to the house again to continue what she made her do for many years. That was when one of her friends told her about an organization, the anti-trafficking, where she can ask for help. So she called us. After listening to her, I wish I had the power to go down to Nigeria to meet the woman who sold her 15-year-old daughter for prostitution. With the help of ethno-psychologists and my help, she's okay in a protection home where she now goes to school. She's surrounded by professionals. But my fears still remain. Can she forget all these years of abuse? That's a question for another day. Abuse on children that accompany them from children to adulthood. When a child is asked not to speak her mother tongue because she has to learn a foreign language, there should be more to talk on this. The story of a lady with HIV was a tough one. She refuses to take her drugs, saying the HIV was a punishment from God all the years she was a sex worker. And she's willing to die. Oh God, that was very tough. I had to pour my heart out. I had to quote the Bible, which I'm not even used to, but I practiced before going to meet her at the hospital. I needed her to see the love from the doctors and nurses who were extremely perfect. Even at home, anytime the hospital calls me, my heart just flies with fear. She was giving up for life, giving up on life. I had to do something. So one day I asked to speak with her sister, with her permission though, because she told me the sister was the only one from the family aware of her situation. So I spoke with the sister. I spoke with her pastor, with her permission also. After about a week or so, with the doctors, the nurses, the sister, the pastor and the operator, and myself, finally, she was convinced and started taking her drugs. For us, it was a victory. She's okay and take her drugs often. As a mediator, I work with empathy, and sometimes I have to fight so hard as not to bring my work back home, which is never easy. I don't know if I still have time, but I would like to explain the problem the refugees and the asylum seekers faces during the COVID. Some were positive to COVID, but was without symptoms and was lodged in a hotel. I had to go and explain why they have COVID, but no drugs was administered to them. During that period, I had to get a new mobile phone and a new SIM card so they can get to me or myself calling them to avoid having to rush there in the middle of the night. Before I sleep, I call them one after the other. That was my strategy for survival. Like my colleague said before, foodstuffs were taken to them, some of them that could no longer work again or provide for themselves. And most of them are very afraid of living outside because of the threat from their madam, because they might come in contact if they're on the street. And they said I should cut my presentation very short, and which I am doing. I think I have to stop here. I thank Osman Italy for choosing me to speak on the work of the mediators. I am very happy for the opportunity given to me to explain what I do and love doing, and for the fact that the network are putting a lot of effort to see the end of this abuse. I'm sorry if I went too further, which I think I did not, because I have to cut some of the things that are necessary. I'm ready for any question if there's any. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you very much. Sandra was part of the Netcare project in the training and also in the services for cultural mediation for Nigerian women and girls. So thank you for your great work and for your preparation and commitment. And now I know that we are running late, but if there are a few questions or some interventions from the participants, we will give some time to the speakers to answer these questions. And also I would like to underline that my colleagues will share a link for the evaluation of the final conference, which will help us to improve our work for the future. And of course, it would be good also to organize other moment of discussion for the future. I don't know if there are some questions.
Yeah.
Also from the chat.
In the chat, yeah, the 4 questionnaires, one each language of partner of the project. So English, general language, Italian, Spanish, and Greek. Can you see him in the chat? Okay, clearly. Perfect.
Just one thing before, there was a question from Khadija, another cultural mediator working for the Arab communities. She was asking the difference between cultural mediation and interpretation, and Anis replied about the importance of using same references, and of course cultural mediation means something while interpretation means something else. Of course, Sandra knows very well, because Sandra, Khadija, and many colleagues, they do both. Cultural mediation is more for social services and in protection services, while interpretation is for legal services, because they are just asked to report what the person is saying, like in the asylum request commission to approve your request of asylum, or in front of a court, and etc. But for protection and social services, cultural mediation is very, very important to create what Anis said, a bridge, a contact to improve the access to that service. There is a question in the chat. Yes, from the Anti-Violence Centers Lanara for Ilaria Boiano. If instruments, tools adopted by anti-violence centers during the COVID-19 pandemic, do you think they will be implemented even during no emergency time, no pandemic time? What is your thought about this?
Yes, for sure. The best practices we developed during the emergency time has been consolidated as practices helping to enhance the access of women to justice. However, we hope to overcome any kind of emergency mood, because what we experienced during the pandemic emergency measures are in concrete the permanent obstacles that women face, just they were exacerbated by the situation. So we need to systematize and ask for the consolidation of some measures, and above all, we need to systematize the training for operators that shall be, according international obligation, trained with the aim to recognize victims and give priority to the empowerment of rights, of fundamental rights, than to prosecute situation as illegal immigration. So we need to reinforce the different level of rights and interests which are in play.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. I would like to leave the floor to my colleagues Beatrice, Ismini, Natasha, Anna, and Elisa for the final greetings, if you can.
So thank you very much to everybody for your very interesting explanations and how to give us a situation, more closer situation about your work in the different spheres as you work in them. And I would like to emphasize or to focus on the great effort that the pandemic has caused to all you who works in these different with this different target group, with exploitation, with women, with minors, with Lgbt collective, and I would like to give you a great congratulations for your explanations, and to reinforce us to continue working on this subject so necessary and with so many things to do. So thank you very much for the great morning of today, and for me, congratulations.
We would like also to say thank you to everyone that participated and made the final conference possible. Thank you for organizing that all speakers from all countries are heard and their views and experiences are shared with us for our benefit and for the benefit of improvement of services. Especially thanks to our experts, our speakers, our team, Anis and Trania from Greece, and of course, Ilaria, Sandra, Anthony, and Miguel for all your contributions. Thank you very much. This is all from us. Thank you.
I just want to join these greetings. So thank you, Marianella, for organizing this and for hosting today. Thank you and congratulations to all the precious speakers of today. And closing this big, huge project from our side, from the Anti-Violence Center side, we just wish that it's a beginning. It's a moment of a start, of a new start with the cultural linguistic mediation. We hope to keep going on with you and with this beautiful service of these great women. So thank you again.
Okay, we would also like to thank, of course, everybody for the organization, coordination, the technical aspect, the speakers, but we would like also to thank the attendees, that they stay, most of them, the majority of them stay with us, even if we are almost half an hour late. So I would also like to thank people that they stay here to watch this conference.
Bye, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mironella, for all the organization.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.